So if I had to peg down the theme today between the first reading and the gospel, it would be transition. Okay? Change in life as time goes on. And for that, the gospel is actually the easier part, with the very first disciples stumbling upon Jesus at the end of the first chapter of John. They see Jesus, and John the Baptist gives them a little hint, of course. And from there, their lives transition. Their lives are never the same again. They go from fishermen to fishers of men. You are Simon, son of John, and you shall be called Cephas, which translates Peter. Now, the book of Samuel is it's a little trickier to understand. And I want you to understand, because Samuel is a major figure in the Old Testament. So I wonder how many of you can give me a little factoid about Samuel. What his mother's name was, perhaps, his role in biblical history, and maybe a physical description. I know there are some people here from Cabrini School from 5th to 8th grade who know, because we've had the book of Samuel all this week, so don't worry if you don't know any of those answers. I'd be hard-pressed to answer as well if our positions were reversed, and I haven't been reading about Samuel all last week. I don't know, there's something about him. He seems easy to forget about for one reason or another, but he is important anyway. For one thing, he is the last of the judges. Do you remember the book of Judges? Relatively early in the Bible. The judges were the unofficial leaders of Israel before there were kings. All right, so at that point in history, the Hebrews had successfully escaped Egypt, Moses and all that. They had successfully gotten to the Promised Land, which would later be called Israel and Judah. So we're there yet. However, there were no kings. There was no centralized, organized government. There were no leaders yet. So the judges were these charismatic individuals that were somehow keeping the nation together and safe in some way. They were all different. They all dealt with the crisis of the generation. So Samson and Delilah. Samson was an immoral judge, but a powerful weapon against the enemies of Israel. Gideon was a brave warrior judge. Deborah was a clever judge and a prophetess, double duty. Samuel was the last one. Remember how I said the theme today is transition? Samuel was the guy that witnessed the transition from unofficial leaders to formal kings. And it was his responsibility to kind of form and mold Saul as the first king of Israel, and he'd at least begin that same process for David, the second and greatest king of Israel. So again, Samuel is the guy that is witnessing a change going on in society. And he knew that a king was a bad idea. But he also knew that it was going to happen whether he liked it or not. And he had to at least try his best to combine that dangerous idea of kingliness with the wisdom of the past and the will of God. And I don't think that was ever easy for him. So there's one other character that dealt with unexpected change, and that's Eli, also from our first reading. Now, Eli was the priest that Samuel was studying under, and we forget about this so easily. Eli's family was going to be the priestly family for the foreseeable future, but it didn't work out that way, unfortunately, because his two sons, priests could have kids back then, his two sons were so amazingly disrespectful to God. Now, our first reading ended, so God keeps waking Samuel up in the middle of the night. And he says, "Here I am, Lord." And it ends right before we hear the message that God kept waking Samuel up, in the first place to give. So here is the message that Samuel hears that night. Where are you? 1 Samuel. There we go. The Lord said to Samuel, I am about to do something in Israel that will cause the ears of everyone who hear it to ring. On that day I will carry out in full against Eli everything I threatened against his family. I announced to him that I am condemning his family once and for all because of this crime. Though he knew his sons were blaspheming God, he did not reprove them. Samuel then slept until morning when he got up and opened the doors to the temple of the Lord. He feared to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called to him, Samuel, my son, what did God say to you? Hide nothing from me. So Samuel told him everything and held nothing back. Eli answered, He is the Lord. He will do what he judges best. As they say, that's a cold bowl of chili. That's the entire family of Eli got fired from priesthood directly by God. That's harsh. But notice that Eli didn't whine, complain, or beg. God will do what he judges best. And I think that teachable moment of Eli stayed with Samuel for the rest of his life. All right? That sheer interior knowledge that the will of God will be done. I know a lot of people, maybe even a lot of people right here, right now, a lot of people struggle with that, knowing that God's will be done, whether it's good news or bad. Because the blessings of God are more or less pretty easy to accept most of the time. It's those moments of rebuke when it really seems like we don't have the favor of God. That's what makes things tough for us to wrap our heads around. Sometimes things don't work out. Our best intentions are not always good enough. And sometimes things don't stay the same, even though we want them to. But the one constant in all of that is God's fidelity to us. And the one thing that has to stay the same is our fidelity to God. Our trust in God. If only we open our lives to him as he deems necessary, we will roll with any complication the world throws at us. We can handle any transition, whether it be a new and demanding ministry, like the disciples, whether it involved a bad and selfish leader, which is what Samuel had to deal with, or even the sad news that something good is about to end in favor of something else, which is what Eli had to cope with. Because for all of this, the constant is that God is always faithfully at our side, guiding us along the way. That is true during the moments of blessing, and it's also true during those moments of rebuke. God is always at our side, and we're called always to put our trust in him during moments of good news and bad news alike, in any moment of transition in between.